Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Aneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Tehran says it's considering counter-sanctions in response to the new curbs imposed by the European Union. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh announced suspending all talks with the bloc in various fields. Earlier, the EU imposed sanctions on 8 top-ranking Iranian commanders, accusing them of human rights violations. The list also includes the head of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami, 3 Iranian presidents and police chiefs. Pakistan security forces have killed a terrorist during an intelligence-based operation in northwestern district of South Waziristan. In a statement, military's media wing said the killed terrorist was active member of banned TTP's Baitullah Mahsoud group since 2006. The ISPR said terrorist Pir alias Assad was involved in attacks on security forces. The G7 group of nations have called on Russia to immediately de-escalate tensions with Ukraine in line with its international obligations. In a joint statement, G7 foreign ministers condemned an increase in Russian troops build-up near Ukrainian border. Earlier, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov warned the West against fueling belligerent sentiments. In the U.S. state of Minnesota, civil unrest has gripped a Minneapolis suburb for a second night after the police killing of an unarmed black man. Police fired tear gas and stun grenades as hundreds defied a curfew ordered by Governor Tim Walz. Police say the officer mistakenly opened fire on the victim with her gun instead of a taser. Meanwhile, police shot and killed a high school student in Knoxville, Tennessee after he opened fire on them, wounding an officer. India has again reported world's highest coronavirus infections today as more than 161,000 people tested positive. In Pakistan, 118 people lost their lives to the virus and over 4,300 tested positive since yesterday. The global number of coronavirus deaths is approaching 3 million, while the caseload has topped 136 million. These were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Let's start from Iran, which says it is considering counter-sanctions in response to the new curbs imposed by the European Union. Earlier, the bloc imposed sanctions on 8 Iranian commanders, including the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh announced the suspension of all talks with Brussels. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said targeting Tehran's nuclear facility amounts to a war crime. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Zarif said Iran will name the culprits once the investigation is complete. However, he mentioned that Israel has missed no chance to jeopardize the 2015 nuclear deal since the talks. Pakistan's security forces have killed a terrorist during an intelligence-based operation in northwestern district of South Waziristan. The killed terrorist was active member of banned TTP's Baitullah Mahsoud group since 2006. In a statement, the military's media wing said an operation was conducted in Ladha area of the district on the reported presence of terrorists. ISPR said during intense exchange of fire, one terrorist named Pir alias Assad was shot dead. He added the terrorist was involved in attacks on security forces. Now, Pakistan has slammed the latest killings of civilians by Indian troops in occupied Kashmir. In the last few days, Indian forces have killed 12 Kashmiris in the occupied valley. In a statement, the Foreign Office expressed concerns over the intensification of fake encounters. The Foreign Office said extrajudicial killings of young men are completely unlawful. It said the world must hold India accountable for its gross human rights violations. Pakistan has repeatedly called for an independent probe into the killings of innocent Kashmiris in fake encounters. The Russian military build-up on the Ukrainian border has drawn global ire and concerns. More about the Russia-Ukraine border tensions in this report. Tensions are soaring in the separatist-held eastern parts of Ukraine bordering with Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky's government backtracked from implementing the Sten Meir formula agreed with the rebels, sparking violence. The G7, including Britain, France and the US, has asked Russia to draw down its troops from the border. In a joint statement, G7 foreign ministers called on Russia to immediately de-escalate tensions in line with its international obligations. Washington says it is closely monitoring the situation.
First, let me say we are concerned, as I've said in the past, but we've been, of course, watching it over the course of the weekend about the increasing aggression of Russian forces on the border.
But Russia has denied accusations of starting a war, saying it is not answerable for the movement of troops in its territory. On a visit to Egypt, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Kyiv has waged a war on its people by calling them terrorists.
We recommend to all the responsible countries, including Turkey, to analyze the situation thoroughly, to analyze the everlasting militaristic proclamations of the regime in Kiev, and warn them against fueling belligerent sentiments in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Ukraine says Russia has rebuffed its request for a dialogue between Zelensky and President Vladimir Putin, but the Kremlin says it is unaware of any such request. Now, in the U.S. state of Minnesota, civil unrest has gripped a Minneapolis suburb for a second night after the police killing of an unarmed black man. Police fired tear gun and stun grenades as hundreds defied a curfew ordered by Governor Tim Walz. Operation Safety Net said protesters launched bottles, fireworks, bricks and other projectiles at officials. Meanwhile, the city's police chief said the officer who killed Dawn Wright mistakenly opened fire with her gun instead of a taser. Minnesota's sports team in Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the National Hockey League have suspended their games. Wright was killed about 16 kilometers from the place where George Floyd was murdered last May. In another incident, police shot and killed a high school student in Knoxville, Tennessee, after he opened fire on them, wounding an officer. Knoxville police said they were responding after reports of a gunman at the school and found the suspect in a bathroom. Moving on now, India has again reported the world's highest COVID-19 cases today as more than 161,000 people tested positive. The global number of coronavirus deaths is approaching 3 million, while the caseload has topped 136 million. More about the coronavirus in this report. The global health institutions have once again warned that the pandemic is far from being over. Just as India overtook Brazil with the second highest number of infections, tens of thousands flouted COVID-19 SOPs as they gathered at the Indian Ganges River for the world's largest pilgrimage. Meanwhile, India has approved the use of Russian Sputnik V vaccine. Discrepancies surrounding the COVID-19 vaccines also continue to grow, as Australia has announced to not buy Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, further delaying its immunization drive. The World Health Organization has warned that infections are rising exponentially despite widespread countermeasures.
We are in a critical point of the pandemic right now. The trajectory of this pandemic is growing. In the seventh week in a row, we've had more than 4.4 million new cases reported in the last week. If you compare that to a year ago, we had about 500,000 cases being reported per week. Last week, we had 4.4 million cases. If you look on our website and you actually look at the epi curve and the trajectory of the pandemic right now, it is growing exponentially.
Europe has surpassed the grim milestone of 1 million coronavirus deaths just a day after easing of restrictions in the United Kingdom. The country logged the highest number of new cases since April 1st. However, a new study says a highly contagious variant first identified in Britain does not cause more severe disease in hospitalized patients. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned that the third wave of the pandemic can prove to be the toughest yet.
The number of infections is currently far too high. The use of intensive care units in our hospitals is increasing again, and we have to say that this third wave might turn out to be the toughest for us. And to break it, of course, the most important weapon we have is the vaccine, and testing helps us build a bridge until the inoculation works.
As countries scramble for vaccines amid shortages and financial shortcomings, the World Bank and Global Vaccine Alliance (Gavi) have urged the countries with excess vaccines to release them to poor states. Now in Pakistan, 118 more have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, taking the tally to 15,619. The Health Ministry says just over 4,300 tested positive overnight. The ministry said the nationwide caseload is approaching 730,000. It said out of this, more than 638,000 have recovered, while there are over 76,000 active cases. The ministry said more than 5,000 are hospitalized for the virus across the country. Now, the Taliban say they are not ready to attend a summit on the Afghan peace process in Turkey if it takes place on the 16th of April. But they did not rule out attending the conference at a later date. In a message, a Taliban spokesperson said they are reviewing the agenda shared by the United States and a final decision is yet to be made. The meeting is part of a draft peace plan floated by the Biden administration as it reviews the Doha peace deal. Turkey is hosting the meeting with the United Nations and Qatar as part of a US-backed push to jumpstart the peace process. Meanwhile, Turkey says it is committed to a 2019 maritime demarcation deal in the eastern Mediterranean with Libya. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said this after meeting Libya's Prime Minister Abdülhamid Dbeibeh in Ankara. Speaking to the media, Erdogan said Turkey's support for Libya prevented the fall of Tripoli. He also said that Ankara's backing ensured there were no new massacres in the war-torn country. Erdogan vowed to extend all support to Libya's government of national unity. For his part, the visiting dignitary hailed Turkey's crucial role in ensuring a lasting ceasefire in Libya. Prime Minister Dbeibeh and a delegation of ministers are making their first visit to Turkey since taking office last month. Now moving to Russia, where a firefighter has died and several others injured after a fire erupted at a historic factory in St. Petersburg. Authorities say the fire broke out over several floors of the building near the Neva River. As many as 40 people have been evacuated, while 2 firefighters have been hospitalized. The building used to be a state-run clothing factory in 1841 and was privatized in 1992. The Muslims around the world have begun the fasting month of Ramadan. The observers fasting from sunrise to sunset will have to navigate through the COVID-19 restrictions for a second year in a row. Muslims gathered for Taraweeh prayers in Arab and Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia. Some countries are imposing new restrictions to prevent these practices from becoming super spreaders. To feel the spirit of Ramadan amid pandemic, few restaurants have been given permission to open at iftar time. However, the restaurants have to adhere to strict rules. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. New Zealand has become the first country to introduce a new climate change law. The new legislation requires businesses and insurers to report the effect of climate change in their procedures. The bill will include banks, insurances and 200 major companies of New Zealand, having total assets of $700 million and above. Climate Change Minister James Shaw said New Zealand cannot hit its zero carbon emission goal by 2050 without involving the business sector. Shaw further said that the law will bring climate risks and resilience into financial and business decision-making. The bill has been introduced in the New Zealand Parliament and is expected to receive its first reading this week. Now, Russia has marked the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's historic space flight by lighting up the sky with hundreds of drones. Gagarin became the first human to conquer space on 12th of April 1961. Let's find out more in this report. Veliki Novgorod residents admired the swarm drone display illuminating the skies, with the devices lined up in synchronized light displays, forming a rocket, satellite, and an orbital ship. Gagarin's success was one of the Soviet Union's most important Cold War victories. It was also pivotal moments in Russia's space race with the US, his 108-minute orbit around the Earth, and his Vostok 1 rocket propelled him to international fame. Vostok 1 was Gagarin's only spaceflight, but he served as the backup crew to the Soyuz 1 mission, which ended in a fatal crash, killing his friend and fellow cosmonaut. Fearing for his life, Soviet officials permanently banned Gagarin from further spaceflights. After completing training at the Air Force Engineering Academy in 1968, he was allowed to fly regular aircraft. Gagarin died 5 weeks later when the MiG-15 training jet he was piloting crashed near the town of Kirshak. Well, now, like any other businesses, Union Square's green market has also been very slow during the pandemic. But bees, honey and veggies seem to have kept the market alive by attracting some customers. Let's find out in this report. With the sprawling city skyline as his backdrop, Andrew Cote tends to his beehives on the rooftop of a 38-story residential building in Manhattan. Cote has over 60 beehives on rooftops and in the community gardens throughout New York City. Once the bees used to make enough honey for Cote to harvest, usually in July and September, only a portion of that honey is sold at his stand at the Union Square Green Market.
2 boxes behind me, that's for the bees. It's all for the bees. So if it's brood, if it's pollen, if it's honey, that's for the bees. I'll add a 3rd box, usually a shorter one called a medium or maybe called a shallow, and that honey will be for us to harvest. So we take a very small amount of the honey.
At the Union Square Green Market, Cote says Andrew's honey had their best sales day in 13 months in late March, but it was a low bar. While some are hopeful that business activities are gradually gaining pace, others are not satisfied. Manager of Norwich Meadows Farm, Tenzin Thokme, says his produce stand needed more than hope.
It's been terrible. Comparing to this month, to the past, this month is much better. Like we are doing a little better than past 12 months. It was really hard for us to get through.
Executive Director at Union Square Partnership Jennifer Fox says, although the district had suffered through the pandemic, the green market is the #1 foot traffic driver in the neighborhood. Fox said 33 businesses have opened or plan to open in the district since January 2020. He said pre-pandemic, 40 new businesses usually opened in the Union Square district each year. Nine business stories shares in Asia Pacific are trading mixed as investors struggle for direction amid surging third wave of the pandemic threatening economic slowdown. The ASX 200 in Australia has shed fractionally, while mainland Chinese shares have also slipped over 0.5%. Sales Kospi and Japan's Nikkei 225 have added close to 1%. Meanwhile, the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong has also edged up marginally. Now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the globe. With that, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.